The Voice referendum has led to a significant rise in racism against First Nations people, highlighted in the Call It Out report. The federal government announced an $11 million investment in Indigenous language education and a 10-year national strategy to address food insecurity in remote Indigenous communities. Additionally, Pilbara residents faced democratic challenges as remote polling was cancelled due to a cyclone, requiring them to travel far to vote. More of that later. Kaya, I'm Leanne Djilandi Dolby, and this is the National Indigenous Times Daily News Bulletin for the 6th of March 2025. The Voice referendum has left a lasting impact, not just politically, but socially. A new report has revealed a significant rise in racism towards First Nations people, particularly online and in the media. The Call It Out report recorded 453 verified incidences of racism between March 2023 and March 2024. With a sharp increase in reports from witnesses, a sign that racial hostility has become more visible. In a troubling revelation, the report details how misinformation and hostility during and after the referendum led to a wave of racial abuse, affecting both individuals and Indigenous organisations. The Called Out report, a collaboration between the Jumbunna Research and the National Justice Project, has highlighted the deepening racial divide in Australia. Many incidences reported occurred in traditional and social media, where high-profile commentators, some denying historical facts like the stolen generation, spread harmful narratives. Notably, more than 40% of these incidences took place on social media platforms or within mainstream media outlets. Furthermore, government and private institutions were also identified as environments where racism was frequently observed, highlighting a pervasive issue that extends beyond digital spaces to institutional settings. Perhaps most disturbing is the impact on Indigenous children. One report describes how a 12-year-old boy was subjected to racial slurs in a school group chat with messages like, "No wonder why everyone voted no." This is one of the many reports detailing verbal, physical, and institutional racism that Indigenous people face daily. Industry professor Lyndon Coombs weighed in on the report, stating racism overshadowed rational debate during the Voice referendum, making open hostility more visible than ever. Professor Coombs emphasised that racism isn't new in Australia, it's deeply embedded in the culture and has adapted over time. One of our darker moments in this regard was the 2023 referendum, he said, but we've learned an important lesson. We need to understand the forces that actively work against us, as well as the unconscious biases hardwired into Australian culture. The federal government has announced an $11 million investment in Indigenous language education. More than 40 communities will benefit from 26 funded projects aimed at supporting Indigenous language teaching, with over 100 trainee language educators being trained and more than 70 schools participating in the initiative. For some communities, this is a lifeline. A South Australian applicant shared that their language had not been used in everyday life for years. There are no fluent speakers left, only a handful with pronunciation skills, they said. We hope that within 5 years, we'll have enough teachers to bring our language back into classrooms. A Queensland applicant reflected on the painful history of language suppression. When we were kids, we weren't allowed to speak our language in school. Now the same school is helping us bring it back. Minister for Indigenous Australians Mullindiri McCarthy said that the investment would ensure First Nations languages thrive in the future. The government has launched a 10-year national strategy to tackle food insecurity in remote Indigenous communities. Federal Senator Mullindiri McCarthy announced a plan in Maningrida, Arnhem Land, calling it a critical step forward in addressing the crisis of food affordability and accessibility. In an effort to address high grocery costs faced by many remote communities, a significant investment of $50 million will be allocated to subsidise 30 essential food items in local stores. This initiative will not only provide much needed price support for residents, but also aim to stabilise the food supply chain. Through increased warehouse capacity, the identification of 150 remote stores as a part of this program is a strategic move to ensure that essential goods remain accessible and affordable for those living in underserved areas. John Patterson, CEO of AMSAT, says, "For too long, people haven't had the choice to eat healthy, not because they don't want to, but simply they can't afford to." The government says that this strategy is a part of its broader commitment to reducing the cost of living in remote areas and ensuring better health outcomes in First Nations people. The democratic rights of Pilbara residents have been affected after the WA Electoral Commission cancelled remote polling, cancelled remote, cancelled remote polling in Nullagine just days before the WA state election. The town's residents must travel 400 kilometres to Newman to cast their vote. A 1 hour polling window is open in Marble Bar, but road closures make it inaccessible. Bruce Booth, a local community leader, said, "We want to see the polling booths come to the community, not chase the polling booths, because if we miss out, we get in trouble. Voting is compulsory, and residents could face a $50 fine if they can't vote." WA has the lowest Indigenous voter enrolment rate in Australia, just at 86.1%. The Wake said safety concerns forced the decision, but Indigenous leaders say more must be done to ensure fair access to voting in remote communities. A Sydney-based museum has returned 16 ancestral skulls to 6 villages in Papua New Guinea, marking a moment of cultural and historic significance. For over 40 years, museum staff engaged with descendants of the skulls, working towards repatriation. Jude Philp, museum senior curator, said people are looking at the repatriation as a rebirth of their history, a way to honour their ancestors and wisdom. The handover ceremony in Papua New Guinea included song, dance, and a traditional pig roast feast. PNG's Deputy Secretary for Community Development and Religion, Jack Sambu, captured the emotion of the moment. These ancestors were taken aboard a Russian corvette nearly 150 years ago. Now they return home on a Boeing jet. Their journey spans time and distance. Stories like this highlight the importance of repatriation, not just as an act of returning objects, but as a way to restore cultural identity, honour ancestors, and heal historic wounds. That's today's Daily News Roundup from National Indigenous Times. For more news, head to nit.com.au and sign up for our free newsletter.